This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us today on this Thursday's programming, we start with K-State Associate Professor and Director of the Pet Food Research Program, Greg Aldrich, and K-State Research and Extension Summer Research Fellow, Kiara McCalister from Florida A&M University. They share about the KSRE Summer Research Fellowship Program and their work this summer on developing a pet food preference evaluation method for cats. Also ahead, K-State wheat pathology specialist Kelsey Anderson Onofre shares her insight into wheat streak mosaic virus and what producers can do now to prevent the spread of the disease in the coming year. We end with this week's horticulture piece from K-State horticulturalist Ward Upham. He says trees should be a priority for watering, especially if water use restrictions are in place. That and more awaits us ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for a special highlight of some programs that we have going on here at K-State this summer, and that's the K-State Research and Extension Summer Research Fellowship. So to talk about this subject, I have with me two great guests today. First and foremost, Greg Aldrich. He is an associate professor in the Grain Science and Industry Department here at K-State, and he also serves as the Pet Food Program Director. So Greg, thanks for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
Absolutely. And we also have, to talk about this subject, Kiara McCalister, who is actually one of our fellows this summer. So Kiara, thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you.
Absolutely. And she is from Florida A&M. So to talk about their research, we're going to cover that a little bit later. It's a unique area of research that we have when we're thinking about our listeners here. Mm-hmm. They're more ag-related, so typical agriculture-related subjects. But this might be a little bit more interesting to them. It's cat food.
Well, it is, and it may be not traditional production agriculture, but it's certainly using agricultural products.
Yeah, so that'll be cool to cover here in a moment. But to start with, we're going to talk about this K-State Research and Extension Summer Research Fellowship a bit more. So tell us a little bit about this program.
So first off, what we are doing is bringing in students from underrepresented minorities into the university community, and we're trying to give them an experience in the area of research, primarily in agricultural research. They've been recruited to come to Kansas State University, and then for a few weeks prior to their arrival, we've started with a number of different introductions, orientation, training programs, and the such. And when they arrive, then it's boots on the ground. We're ready to go into the research project. Each of them will have completed a research project from start to finish, the scientific method, and it will culminate then with a presentation at the end of their research and some of their findings.
Wow, excellent. So an exciting program for sure, and a great opportunity for undergraduates, I'm assuming, for the most part?
Yeah, most of them are undergraduates, and then it also allows for us to incorporate some of our graduate students into a role of mentorship as well. So it's a win-win all the way around.
Yeah, for sure. A really cool collaborative experience. But I know this program has only grown since it started. It started in 2006, and now, up to this point, there's been 93 students that have gone through it.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Incredible.
And this year we had 15, I believe, to start. So it's getting some momentum.
Wow, excellent. So, Kiara, now that we've kind of covered the program that you're in, let's give a little bit of a background about you. What is your background? How did you end up here at K-State?
So my name is Kiara. I'm from Miami, Florida. I currently attend Florida Agriculture and Mechanical University. I'm going into my senior year studying animal science pre-veterinary. My hopes of getting into vet school within the next year. I found out about this program actually through the Manners Conference, through my USDA liaison. He introduced me to Dr. Wiley, and from there she was like, oh, I would love to have you. So I actually applied, and I was accepted and got through the interview. Really excited to come and get some experience doing this research.
Awesome. Well, how exciting, and what a great opportunity to use your network to learn about these sorts of programs. Mm-hmm. So what has your experience really been like so far? I know you're at the end of your program now. We just talked about that a little before we went on air here. But what has your experience been like?
So it's actually been really fun. I'm thankful for the people that I've met here and my research professor and Caitlin, the graduate assistant. I feel like I've learned a lot through how to present and through doing research and what it takes to be in graduate school or get a master's or PhD. I learned a lot about the process that it takes now. So I feel like it's really helped me through research and then also just knowledge and then making connections through friends here as well.
What a great opportunity to see another university
Yeah.
halfway across the country. I know what that experience is like, making that big of a move. Are you experiencing a little bit of homesickness?
Yeah, being from Miami and coming to Kansas, especially a small town like Manhattan, has been a very big change. But I actually wanted to come here and experience that just to know. You know, it's better to know than to not come at all and to never experience it. Just because having new experiences is good.
Absolutely. An opportunity for growth in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you've made the most of it, especially in that area of research. So let's talk a little bit about that now. So tell me about your research you've been doing.
So I have been studying method development for preference ranking with cats. So there has been a lot of preference ranking development with dogs and choosing what ingredient within food that they like instead of making it a choice. So we want to know what exactly within the food is it that cats like so that it could help with nutrition and maybe pharmaceutical, and it just has a lot of uses knowing what ingredient it is that they specifically like instead of just making them choose between two choices.
Has this been your first exposure to research in this sort of capacity?
Actually, I did attend a research-based high school, so this isn't my first touch into research, but it is on a graduate level. So I haven't really been in any research programs in undergraduate, but this is my first time doing a summer internship where I'm allowed to work with a professor and focus on research mainly.
Really cool that you're building upon those experiences and hopefully discovering more and more what you enjoy. There's a lot to do in research, as Greg will attest to.
Absolutely.
And a little bit of that diversity, like you hinted at, within the College of Ag is this pet food area.
Exactly. It's one of those things that we don't typically think of in terms of production or animal agriculture. But in the U.S., there's 180 million dogs and cats. It's a $42 billion industry. And we use a pretty substantial amount of raw agricultural commodities that are upcycled or value added. And so it's truly one of those things that the universities should be paying attention to. Kansas is either 1 or 2 in the country in terms of pet food production.
Wow.
So we use a lot of commodities that are produced here in the state, and those are manufactured in foods that are shipped all over the world.
With y'all's research, I was doing a little bit of background on it, and I discovered that one of the hardest parts was really kind of vetting which of the cats you guys were going to use in this research, because it's a process.
What it is. And that's exactly what Kiara's been involved in, is the development of that process. So it's not like this was something that's cookie cutter that we already had scripted out and we knew exactly what we were going to do. She and the team have been working on the apparatus that we're using. They've been working on the food product and how we manufacture it and make sure that it's flavorful but not too flavorful, that it's sort of bland so we can add things to it and it doesn't detract from the overall test. And then the execution or the timing, the sequencing of how those cats were going to be exposed to the apparatus and the food to see whether or not we could get them to discriminate from one flavor or the next or one aroma to the next. And so it's taken a lot of steps to get there.
Anyone that's been involved in research will know that it's a lot of trial and error.
And a lot of error.
Yes.
And a lot of repeat, right?
Yes.
That's kind of the fun part of it, right?
Yeah, it's been fun trying to figure out what we should do next and how to change, or what we should change for the future. It's actually been really fun.
Awesome. Well, I know applying to vet school and hoping to get into vet school, it's an extremely long process and one that's kind of intimidating. So hopefully this is an experience that helps you feel a little bit more confident.
Yeah, actually, it's actually opened my options as well, because I didn't even think to participate in a master's or graduate program before this program. But after learning about what it really is and what it involves, I have been more open to possibly coming back, maybe, to do a graduate program if vet school does not work out.
Kiara has a bright future ahead.
Absolutely. I can tell that just from our conversation today. Yeah. In terms of where you hope this research continues to go from here?
So we've been working on this now for 4 or 5 years. We developed a lot of techniques in the dog, both for ranking and food products, as well as a continuous data set with water-based products or flavors. Now we're trying to get over into the cats to see if we can get the cats trained. And if any of you are out there listening and you have cats, you know that it's very difficult to train a cat to do anything. But the idea here is that if we can take this to the next level, we can start to get the apparatus and the details of the test completed and vetted and validated. Then we can start to use this for more elemental exploration to understand specifically, as Kiara was talking about earlier, those specific elements that are attractive to the cat, or those elements, and when I talk about elements, I'm talking about base chemicals, right? Those elements that may be a distraction or detractant to the cat. And the ultimate is to be able to work on product quality, food preferences for the cat, as well as things that we might include in a food product that we didn't realize that they don't like. The goal is consistency, quality control, and also getting the cats to talk to us in their own sort of behavioral way.
Well, if listeners are tuning in and they want to know more maybe about your research or even about the Research Fellow program here at K-State, where can they find that information?
The easiest place is grains at ksu.edu, and we have our website there through the department, and there's a contact in there for me, as well as a contact into our pet food program.
Awesome. And then, Kiara, in terms of encouraging students that may be tuning in to get involved in research or maybe even to embark in a fellowship like this themselves, any words of advice?
To just go for it. I mean, there's nothing you can really lose. You're only gaining some more information, some more knowledge. And even if you don't like it, now you know that you don't like it. It's better to know that you like or don't like something rather than never know at all. So to just apply, just go for it. And you never know who you could meet, where it'll take you, and what opportunities could come from it.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for your time today. I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Greg Aldrich. He is an associate professor here at K-State, and he is also the Pet Food Program Director. And that was Kiara McCalister. She is one of our fellows here at K-State this summer from Florida A&M. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for a special segment on wheat streak mosaic virus. And to cover this topic, we have with us today Kelsey Anderson Onofre. She is a wheat pathology specialist here at K-State. So, Kelsey, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. So, like I said, we're going to be talking about this virus, but what really should producers know about this virus?
Yeah, so let's talk today about wheat streak mosaic virus. That is probably on some producers' minds, and if it isn't, it probably should be with the year we had last year. Typically, wheat streak mosaic is a virus that we struggle with in western Kansas, but for the last couple of years, we've had issues in that central corridor of Kansas. So we want to really make sure this time of year that we're managing our volunteer. So as a reminder, wheat streak mosaic virus is a little bit tricky because it's not just one virus, it's actually a complex of viruses. So there's wheat streak mosaic virus, a triticum mosaic virus, and a virus that we refer to as high plains virus or high plains disease. And those three are all vectored by that tiny curl mite. So this is the time of year where we really want to break what we call the green bridge. So what's the green bridge? So that's when some of that wheat that we harvested here back in June and even into July, if you were like me, we're still harvesting in July, when we lose that grain into the field and we get some of that sprouting through the summer. So that's not great because those curl mites, when the wheat's drying down, they're really looking for a place to go. They don't survive very long on that dried down wheat, and they want to migrate to some of that volunteer. And if we don't destroy that volunteer through herbicides or tillage, they'll stay there until we have our fall crop coming in.
You mentioned that it was more so prevalent in the western part of the state, but now it's kind of moseyed its way over towards the eastern side. Is that really why we've seen kind of that movement?
Yeah, so there's probably a couple things that drive that. So, one big one is just we've had some weather that's been really conducive. So over the last couple of years, we've had moisture at just the right time. So we're getting multiple flushes of volunteer in that summer months leading up to that fall planting. Another thing that we heard a lot about this year is volunteer that we're calling kind of sneaky volunteer, right? It's volunteer that we're finding in potentially double crop soybeans or double crop milo. So that's volunteer that is harder to destroy, and it sometimes isn't visible until that second crop is harvested. But what that does is that serves as that bridge for that curl mite. So I think we're seeing more of that, and maybe some volunteer in some cover crops that's making it just stick around in that central corridor a little bit longer. I think this past year it also was warm through the fall, so those mites didn't slow down the same way they would in years where it cools off quickly. So kind of a confluence of factors, but we really want to stay on top of our volunteer management this year to avoid having another outbreak in the central corridor next year.
Sure, because from the sounds of it, we do our weekly weather report with Trip Redmond, and he's kind of been hinting at that this might be a warmer year for us here as well.
Right, so that would be, again, a concern. Those mite populations will stay active into planting. So, some key things, what can we do, right? One, we can destroy our volunteer, and Sarah Lancaster is the one to talk to specifically, but glyphosate and atrazine are two herbicides that are often used for this purpose. There's also an e-update that Sarah's published, thinking really about how we want to manage that volunteer in our system. But the other thing is we want to think about our varieties coming up. So we're going into planting, and we have a lot of options in that western part of the state, right? So if you're in western Kansas, we've got varieties that have what we call the WSM2 gene. So varieties that have resistance to the wheat streak mosaic virus, right? So those are varieties like KS Hamilton, KS Dallas, Joe, Oakley CL. KS Silverado is one that doesn't have that WSM2 gene but does have resistance to the virus. So those are some of our options. Then we also have varieties that have resistance to that wheat curl mite. Tam 112, Bird, Avery, Langan, a newer variety, Western Star, KS Western Star, Whistler. Those are all varieties, some of the varieties that have that wheat curl mite resistance. There's one variety that has both paired together, and that's Guardian, and that's a variety out of Colorado State.
When it comes to these varieties, you've mentioned quite a few there. What are some of the things that producers should be weighing when it comes to looking at all the different types they can choose from?
Sure. So you always want to think about agronomics. So there's some other key things. We can't just think about wheat streak mosaic. You want to think about if you have acid soils or not. You want to think about typically have drought conditions, and you want to think about our other diseases, right? So stripe rust, fusarium head blight, or scab in some parts of the state that are after corn. And maybe you really want to think about tillering in the fall if you have that variety for grazing, right? So it's a whole suite of decisions, and I know it's a lot that producers have to balance, right? But hopefully we do have some varieties out there that kind of fit the bill for a lot of these factors.
So we've covered quite a few of these varieties that are excellent for, across the state. But when it comes to central Kansas specifically, are there any in mind that work best in that region?
Well, that's where we run into a problem, right? So again, there are these varieties with resistance to wheat streak mosaic virus, that those don't always have resistance to the other viruses like triticum mosaic virus or high plains disease. So we have to be careful there. Another small important thing to mention there is that gene WSM2 turns off at either 65 or 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So once the weather starts to warm, we do lose that resistance, right? So none of the varieties that I mentioned are perfect. So we have a tool, and then we have to manage other ways, like controlling our volunteer. But there are some varieties that are adapted to eastern Kansas that have what we probably refer to as tolerance, right? So they don't have those single genes. They're not a silver bullet, but they seem to tolerate heavy infection better, and they will still yield, whereas some varieties that are very susceptible, they just won't yield at all. So some of those varieties that are showing some promise are Palancie's Rockstar is one that seems to hold up better than others. AgriPro Bigfoot is one that is looking promising. SY Wolverine is one that's, in our observations, looked better than others. And then LCS Photon AX and Helix AX have also been showing some promise. So again, these aren't perfect varieties, but they're varieties that if you do have them in a situation that's unavoidable, they probably will yield better than some of the other varieties we have in this region.
I know we've mentioned a lot of varieties here in this show alone, but there's a resource for listeners that they might find really helpful in understanding those. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So every year at K-State, we publish the K-State, well, that used to be called called the K-State Wheat Disease and Insect Variety Rating Guide. Now it's going to be called the K-State Wheat Variety Guide because it's so much more than just insects and diseases in there. So it's a really nice resource that we spend a good amount of time synthesizing data on. So that the MF991, and that will be available here within the next couple of weeks. And in that document, if you just flip to Appendix 1, you'll find all of the disease ratings for wheat streak mosaic and all the other important diseases in this region. So you can really filter through and make your decisions using that guide and some of the other guides that are available in the region.
So that will be linked in today's show notes, as always, which can be found on agtoday.net. But we talked about volunteer wheat being a major host of this, being that it's carried through that mite. But what are some of the other weed hosts that we should be concerned about?
So again, it's not just the volunteer wheat that's a problem, right? But that is a problem. So, just a small amount of volunteer can harbor these mites. But we also want to make sure we're considering our grassy weed species. Barnyard grass is one that's very important. Foxtail is one that is important. Even some of our summer crops can be hosts. So again, it's not just wheat that's a reservoir, but that is probably the most important reservoir that we have out there. So again, if you manage that volunteer wheat, we'll probably be in good shape.
When it comes to kind of the diagnostic concerns, when it comes to these sort of disease issues, is there a resource for producers listening in to kind of confirm that?
Yeah, absolutely. So at K-State, we have the K-State Diagnostic Lab. You can email us at clinic@ksu.edu. You can also find our website at the Plant Pathology Department at K-State. And so our clinic is really nice because we actually can test for these viruses. So if you send us tissue that's symptomatic from a field that you suspect has wheat streak mosaic, we can run a test and see if it has wheat streak mosaic virus or high plains virus or one of several other viruses too. So that's a nice resource. And if you go through your county extension agent, there's a discount there. So it's always good to work right there at your county extension office to get those samples submitted to us. And they have all the information to do that. And we always like to see pictures of the field, so you can send pictures along to me or to that clinic email address, and we can certainly help diagnose the problem there.
Hopefully, like you said, they'll plug in with their local extension office and get started from there.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great place to start. And you can even, if you do see some symptoms in the fall, you can even send us plants in the fall, right? So it's just something to think through as we go into planting. Before we stop here, there's one very important thing I forgot to mention. When we are managing our volunteer, it's really critical to destroy that bridge 2 weeks prior to planting and within 2 miles of where we're planting, right? That would be the best possible scenario because those mites, they survive for 10 days, right? So we want to really at least 2 weeks prior to planting break that green bridge. So those are just some things to keep in our minds as we're thinking through our volunteer wheat management this summer.
Absolutely. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for your time. It's been hard to track you down because you've been so busy with harvest and everything. So I'm really grateful you came in today.
Oh, well, thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. Once again, that was Kelsey Anderson Onofre. She is a wheat pathology specialist here at K-State, speaking on wheat streak mosaic virus. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. It's been a hot, dry summer across Kansas. As a result, homeowners have had to make some tough decisions regarding which elements of the landscape to prioritize for watering. K-State horticulturist Ward Upham says the tree should be number one, followed by shrubs and perennial flowers, vegetables, and lawns. Ward, even with some of the rain that we've received, it looks like there's still a possibility that some people are going to be real short in terms of supply of water, especially for trees and some of the other shrubs.
That's right. Especially getting to the western part of Kansas, they are still under significant drought. And so there are times when you have to decide what is most important to water because you're not going to be able to water everything. And so we recommend you start with the trees. Look especially at your established trees and those that were planted or transplanted in the last 2 or 3 years. If the trees that are established look okay yet, then move to the ones that have been planted the last 2 or 3 years, they don't have an established root system, and therefore they're going to be more sensitive to drought. And then go the established trees, because if you lose those, they're expensive to take out, they're expensive to put in, and it takes a lot of years before you're to the point where they do you much good. And so you want to make sure that they are going to be high enough on your list that you don't take a chance you're going to lose them. Question usually comes, how much? So what you want, even with trees, you want that soil moist only about a foot deep. I mean, you can go deeper. It doesn't hurt anything. But if you have that soil moist down to a foot deep, you're hitting about 80% of those tree roots. And so that's all they're going to need. The way you check that is to use something like a wooden dowel or piece of rebar, something like that. You stick it into the ground. It's going to stop when it hits dry ground. And so you'll be able to tell how deep you go. And then take note of the amount of time it took you to get there. And then from then on, you can just go by time clock. Now, what do you use? I really like drip irrigation, but that can be expensive to get started. If you use that black, weepy hose, that'll work. But it's notorious for being non-uniform for how much it puts out at the beginning of the hose as opposed to the end of the hose. And so the way you get around that is to use what's called a Y adapter on the end of your garden hose. And you hook the beginning and the end of that black weepy hose to that Y adapter. And then it makes that pressure within that leaky hose a lot more uniform. And your distribution, therefore, is a lot more uniform. Make sure you get a Y adapter with little shut-off valves on it. And that way you can control the amount of water so that you don't get so much that it runs off. And so that allows you to very inexpensively water those trees. Now, if you have a smaller tree that's been recently transplanted, you don't need the Y adapter. You just take that black leaky hose and go around the tree several times, and it's going to even out. And so you just put on enough that you get that water down to about a foot deep.
So how far out from the tree are we going?
So you want to be under the drip line. So anywhere from 2/3 to the distance of the drip line out to the drip line is where you want it. That's going to be where most of those roots are going to be hit by what you put on, and that'll be enough to keep that tree going.
And really we want to keep this water at the ground level, is that right?
Yeah, it's best if you can use sprinklers. It's just that it's not nearly as efficient because you get a lot more evaporation, get a lot more movement due to wind, that type of stuff. And so if you can keep it close to the ground, you're going to make a much more efficient use of that water.
I know it may not be as convenient, but we'd like to do this maybe earlier in the day if we can.
You can, not as important if you're applying it with a black leaky hose or drip irrigation because you're not as worried about evaporation. If you're using a sprinkler, then that becomes a lot more important. You have better water pressure then, you have less wind, and you have lower temperatures, so it's a better use of that water.
We used to talk about the 5-gallon bucket. Is that still an option for some of us who maybe aren't as good with using the hoses? Yeah,
and so what you use, this is for a small tree that's usually been recently transplanted. And so what you do is you take a 5-gallon bucket and you drill a 1/8 inch hole near the bottom in the side. And then you fill it up with another 5-gallon bucket and it'll drip out that 1/8 inch hole, and it won't come out so fast that it runs off. Normally what I like to do is put it on one side of the tree and then move it to the other side of the tree and repeat the process. So each tree gets about 10 gallons, and that'll do a good job of keeping a young tree watered.
The real key, as you pointed out, is the expense of losing trees and really the inconvenience of losing trees. So maybe just a little bit of preventive medicine here will go a long way.
Yes, and so it's important if we can to protect especially those large established trees.
That's K-State horticulturist Ward Upham with information on how to prioritize watering the landscape during extreme heat. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.